Okay. All right. So, welcome everyone to Birds on My Mind, the ninth session of the Early Bird Lockdown Talk series. In our earlier sessions, we have talked about birding for beginners, understanding birds through games and art. We've talked about the ecology and behavior of birds, and we have talked about bird songs and bird communication. The aim of today's session is to give all of you a peek into a bird scientist's world. What do wildlife scientists do? How do scientists study birds? What is it like to in the wild or gather data? So, to share some of these experiences, we have three eminent scientists in the field of ornithology with us today. We have among us Dr. Tuhina Katti from BNHS, or Bombay Natural History Society, who works on bird migration. We have Dr. Raman Kumar from Nature Science Initiative, who has worked on woodpeckers. And we have Dr. P. Jagannathan from Nature Conservation Foundation, who has worked on the elusive Jordan's courser. I also have with me my colleagues Abhisheka, Garima, and Subhadra. All of us work at the Education and Public Engagement program at Nature Conservation Foundation as a part of the project called Early Bird, which aims to develop and distribute educational material to introduce beginners to birds. All the participants, as we said before, have been muted during the course of the talk to avoid disturbance. And if you have any comments, any questions, please type them in the chat box, and we will address all the questions at the end of the session. So please hold on to your questions till then. And just a second. I'll quickly pass on the mic to our first speaker, who is Dr. Tuhina Katti. Tuhina?
Yeah.
Just a sec. I'll stop sharing my screen. Yeah. So Dr. Tuhina Katti joined BNHS in 2013 at the Bird Migration Study Center and was learning the migration study for 3 years, specifically through ringing and recovery studies in different waterbird sites in India. Since 2016, she is working in the wetlands program at BNHS, which works on the conservation action plan for major migratory bird sites in India. She has also co-authored the Indian Bird Migration Atlas. Over to you, Tuhina.
Thank you, Misha. Misha, can you also just give me a 3-minute warning so that I know when to speed up?
Sure.
Let's start my screen sharing. So just yesterday, we all celebrated the World Migratory Bird Day, which for this year the theme was connectivity, and it cannot be more relevant right now. So I'll just be starting with a few most eminent case studies all over the world that gave a new perspective about bird migration to everybody. So this is one that's the bar-tailed godwit, which has done its marathon migration from Alaska to New Zealand. So just recently we had a chance of interacting with the person who has been tracking these birds, and he was telling us that they tracked this bird in they put a satellite transmitter on the bird, which is a small device with an antenna coming out of it, and it will give you daily data on where the bird is moving. And they'd tagged this bird in New Zealand, and then it traveled to China, crossing around 10,000 kilometers in one go, and then went to Alaska. On its way back, the transmitter was actually losing its voltage and it was losing its power. So all of the scientists were sitting there hoping that it just makes it in time to New Zealand. It did. And I think it reached New Zealand, and 2 days later the battery died. So they could at least track the movement. And this bird traveled 11,500 kilometers in 9 days non-stop. So that's when it was called the marathon flyer. And this bird was a pioneer in which the whole connectivity project started. East Asian Australasian Flyway, the flyway where most of these birds come from, gained a lot of gained a lot of fame. So just to give you an idea, when a bird travels that distance, so even if you think of a flight that's covering this distance, you will have to understand that it has to fuel up quite a bit to travel that distance. Uh, Similarly, when the bird left from Alaska, it was almost 1.5 times its wintering site weight. So it had put on half of its own body weight just so that it could carry out this journey all the way around. So this is one example. The next one is a bird that's very close to me. It's a bar-headed goose, and we had been ringing this for some time in Himachal Pradesh. So this bird has the ability to fly over the mountains, and if we have some mountaineers within us, we know that even for mountaineers to cross to reach that height, they need to carry artificial oxygen because the oxygen level is very low. But these birds can fly at that height, even I mean ascend to that height, and they go from I think 1,000 to 6,000 meters in almost 6 hours. So that's a great thing that they do. We used to, I mean, I used to love handling these birds when we were in Himachal. The only thing is, it has so much strength. It's a massive bird. So just one flap of its wing, and it used to give you a tight slap on your face. So this is one of the bird that again has a lot of potential. And the third one is another famous study on Arctic tern, a bird that loves spending its time in summers. So it breeds in the uh, islands of Greenland, and then when winter arrives, it goes down to Antarctica. So what you see out here, this is a study by a group of researchers who were doing nesting studies on terns. And trust me, it's very difficult whenever you're doing nesting studies on terns. So we had a chance of doing a little bit of nesting study in Chambal on little terns. I was just assisting one of our colleagues, and they're nasty. They'll try hurting you. They'll not even, I mean, not try, they will aim at you and hurt you. So having to study them at these nesting sites where there will be thousands of terns. So what they did was they put a geolocator, another device which collects data based on the sunlight intensity and the duration. And they fitted these birds with this device, and then they let them go. And after one entire season, they caught two of those birds back. They're done tagging on 10 birds, and then caught two of those birds back, got the device back, and they were able to trace this migration. So what you see out here is you see two paths. The green ones are the ones which they took to come down from Greenland to Antarctica. So you see when they're coming down, at one point, I'll just open the pointer. Out here, they split their routes. So one bird goes the Africa route and another one goes the South American route. What's interesting is after a certain point, they both meet here on the same day. And then they spend the entire winter together out here in Antarctica, and then they take this S-shaped route back. So what you see out here is when they're coming down, they're using the feeding potential. So they're following shoals of fish to come. So one bird is following one shoal, another one is following another shoal of fish along the coast. But while going back, they make this journey in only half the time because they use the wind currents and not the feeding time for this. So when I said then they meet at one point, even after being dispersed in two different directions, we had something very similar that we recorded. So we had tagged satellite, we had satellite transmitter tagged two flamingos from the same flock along the southeast coast of India. And from one flock in Kanyakumari, we tagged two birds. And for the next few years, we saw that for 3 years, one of the flamingo used to winter in Rameshwaram, in and around, keep traveling around. One of them used to winter in Point Calamar. But when summer used to arrive, both of them used to come to this, to this place. It's called Chundikalam Sanctuary in Sri Lanka on the same day. I don't know how they coordinated that, but they would do it, and it was very interesting. And another interesting study that helped shape a lot of policies in the seas of how bycatch happens, of when the trawlers, the fishing trawlers move at sea. So how all of that is defined by some movement of several species that cross oceans. So this was one of those studies where they had tagged 13 species. Sooty shearwater was one of them. And with the help of the finding of these species and their movement, they actually made policies on where the Pacific ships can move and what will be going to be the restrictions of their movement eventually. So this is another interesting bird because it's a pelagic bird. So it will spend most of its time at sea. It will breed once in 3 or 4 years. So it is not going to breed every year. And what you see out here are the breeding clumps. And these are three different individuals. What's another interesting thing about this bird is it'll once it's done with its breeding for the next 2 years, it may not land on land at all. It'll keep flying for the entire 3 years and it'll only land back again when it's going to breed. So to give you an idea what we do out here, we do bird ringing. Only a bit of it is other devices, and we've been involved in color tagging. So in BNHS, we have been doing bird ringing for quite a bit of time. I've only been involved with them for 6-7 years. So when we have all of these devices and all of these technologies, a lot of people ask us why even ringing is relevant in these times. So when you can put a satellite transmitter, why do you have to put a ring on it? And the whole reason is a very Indian answer is sasta or tikau. It is going to last you a long time and it's quite cheap. So this is another very interesting story of a house sparrow, something quite close to our heart and homes. This was about a few house sparrows that were ringed in Rajasthan and Delhi. And in the later years, they were recovered in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and Uzbekistan as well. So we could understand that there were actually subpopulations of those sparrows which were moving, which does not mean that the sparrows that come to our area or the sparrows that we don't see anymore have migrated out. That's not something that we're presuming right now. And when I said that the rings last a very long time, this could be one of the clues. So this was about albatross ringing. So there was this guy called Chandler Robinson. He had ringed one breeding albatross in 1956, and he never went back to that island. He ringed it in the Pacific Islands. And later, as his last ringing study, he went back there in 2002 just to find that one ringed albatross again. So he had found it almost more than 50 years later. So what we do is bird ringing out here, what I mentioned, and our focus is basically on the mold studies. So when a bird is migrating, there are three major energy consuming activities in its life. One is breeding, it takes a lot of energy. Second is migration, and third is molt. Molt is when it's replacing cyclically, it has a format of replacing all of its feathers. So when it's replacing its feathers, it has to have enough energy to migrate as well as all the energy to replace its feathers in a good condition. So if they don't have enough feed or the habitat's not been good enough, they will either not replace all of their feathers or they will replace them in a very bad quality. And that affects their migration. So what we do, and we especially take special interest in, is understanding the molt pattern when it initiates. So every species has a cyclic pattern of when it will start replacing its feathers, how fast it will replace them, if they'll stop. So the adults and the first year birds will have a different strategy of how they molt. So that's something that's interesting. And that's how we go about it. So in bird ringing, I would love to tell you about some incidents. So whenever we used to have these public relation events or where we used to have training programs, a lot of people used to ask us, I mean, they'd hope that we trap a certain bird which they really like. And more often than not, it used to be either drongos, paradise flycatchers, or tree pies. The best thing is they look beautiful out there in the wild and they have a different behavior of their own. But when you trap them, they're different. So if you're trapping a male paradise flycatcher, it's still fine. If you get a female paradise flycatcher, she'll scream bloody murder. She'll keep screaming at the top of her voice, and that's their behavior. And people used to get very scared. Same is the case with a lot of birds. So birds actually are like kids. They'll be very well behaved when you're alone. But suddenly if you have a visitor, if you have somebody from forest department watching you, they will just throw tantrums. Another place where especially in the coastal areas, the forest department used to ask us if they can come whenever we were ringing flamingos. And we would oblige, only to realize they always thought like flamingos will be these gentle birds and all. So when we trap them, they will keep kicking you all around, they'll keep propelling poop. And most of the forest officers were never really impressed. They never even asked us if they could come to see when we were ringing later, which actually worked in our favor as well. Another interesting thing is when I started in this field, my parents wanted to see what I was doing. And I mean, being in the wildlife field, I think they almost thought I work in pristine forests and where there'll be clean water gushing near me. There was one incident when I was going to be ringing near Mumbai. So I called them. I said, if you can come to Mumbai and you can see me ring. And I'm sure they must have thought I'll be in a forest in a nice place, only to see me coming out of a gutter-filled water, a waist-deep gutter-filled, slush-filled lake carrying a smelly seagull. I don't think they were very impressed by that. So, just going ahead, this is the major data that we collect. So it's the sex of the bird, a male or a female. There are certain areas where a male will go and the certain areas where females will prefer. Most of the times they'll travel together, but there are preferences based on the dominance as well as when the birds arrive. So that again, then the age composition will tell us about the recruitment rate at the breeding site. So this is what we have to communicate to the breeding countries. So we have to communicate to Russia if the juvenile numbers have been good this year or they've not been good enough. Then the morphometric measurements are basically to differentiate the different geographic populations coming to your areas. And primary molt is what I just explained. So I'll show you a few pictures, I think a couple of them. And recoveries is when you ring about a certain site and you release it, and then somebody else traps it in another place, that's called a recovery. So then we understand that a bird has gone from place A to place B. So that's the recovery information. And just to give you an idea, let's say in March, from March and May to July, they'll spend, most of the water birds coming to India, they'll spend their time out here breeding and nesting. And from August to October, they'll start their southward passage. Rather than they'll start moving downwards. So you see some of the arrows are right here, while some have already reached here. So there are some birds like the bar-tailed godwit that I mentioned that they'll do this non-stop flight. It does not mean that the bar-tailed godwits coming to our place would also be doing it, but there are high chances. And there are some birds which will keep taking stopovers. So they'll stop at some time sites, fuel up a little bit again, and then move forward. So, and by November to February is the winter time where they spend most of their time just feeding, putting on enough weight. And by March, they'll all start going up. So again, you see some birds are still here while others have already reached here. So that's based on the different strategies of their movement. Some will keep taking stopovers again, and some will just carry on with a normal flight. So what you see out here is what I'm talking about, the molt. So when a bird has carried out a journey of, let's say, 5,000 kilometers, it's evident that the wings are going to be very worn out. So you can see out here, and these are the newly emerging wings. So when I mentioned that if a flight is traveling from, let's say, from Alaska to noticing the feathers also gives us a lot of information. So it will tell us if the bird has taken a nearby stopover, it has staged, I mean, it has spent quite a bit of time at a certain style, or it has directly come to your place. So there are a lot of questions that just molt can answer for you. And that's what we have been stressing upon out here. And
yeah, you asked me to give you a 3-minute.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, you can go on.
This is the information. So when I said recoveries and when we get information of where the bird was recovered, this is the information that we get. So what we do is, let's say the square ones are where the birds are ringed, and then the circles are where they have been recovered. And out here you can see this is for a bird called northern pintail, an Arctic breeding bird. So here again you can see that a lot of the recoveries actually delineate the route. So you can see how the bird is arriving. But what you cannot see is what's the seasonality. So do they use this route to come down or to go up? So then we simply just plotted it according to the seasons to understand what route it took while coming down, what route it took while going back up. And this is evidently very important for us because we have been working in the Central Asian Flyway for a couple of years now, where we have to communicate with the countries of what sites are important for the birds that are coming to India. They may or may not take actions on it, but it's our part of responsibility to identify which sites are important for which season. So we can tell them that, let's say these sites are important whenever the birds are coming down, while these sites would be important whenever the birds going back up. So that is something that we need to communicate. And in the recent years, we've also been shifting to a lot of color banding. So with ringing, what was the necessity was that there has to be another agency, another person ringing somewhere else who will catch our bird, get that ring, read the number that's there on the ring and inform to us. But that was a little tedious process and a lot of factors were involved. So in the recent years, a lot of ringing agencies have moved to color flagging. What you see out here, you see a color flag. So there are different protocols and combinations of what region uses what color all over in the world. So you can't really just select a color that you like. And similarly, like this is for shorebirds, we've done it for ducks and then flamingos. So there are patterns. And thankfully, we have a lot of enthusiastic bird watchers and photographers telling us about where they sight these birds. And they've given us a lot of information on the seasonality, movement, and the connectivity of wetlands and where the birds have been moving in those seasons.
Hi, Tuhina.
Yeah.
Yeah, your time's up. So,
okay, I'll just end this after the slide. Yeah, so that's all that we've been working around and communicating with the migratory flyways. So these are the major 9 flyways that are there in the world, and we majorly work for the Central Asian Flyway, communicating with all the countries and within India of how we can conserve migratory bird sites. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuhina. I'm sure we all got a peek into how bird migration studies are taken and how it's not always very glamorous working with birds. I mean, you have to go into slushy gutters also to catch them. And if you guys have any questions for Tuhina, please hold on to them till the end of the session. We'll have a question answer round then. And I'll quickly move over to our next speaker, who is Raman. Dr. Raman Kumar from Nature Science Initiative is a scientist who studies how changes in the environment caused by human activities affect wildlife and particularly birds. Most of his research is focused on woodpeckers in sal forests, but he is also studying hornbills in populated areas. Raman is closely involved in citizen science programs such as eBird and Season Watch that encourage ordinary people, particularly school children, to take on the role of scientists to observe and monitor birds and trees. He and his colleagues at Nature Science Initiative have been working to create awareness about nature among people by organizing public nature walks, workshops, and by producing relevant awareness materials, including books. So over to you, Raman. Raman? Hi, Raman seems to not be responding. So if you could just bear with us for one moment.
Misha?
Yeah.
Raman just called me. There's a storm there and the internet has been affected. So can we do Jagan's first?
Yeah, sure, Jagan.
And hope that
Yes.
Raman will be able to join after that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'll quickly introduce Jagan then. Jagan does many interesting things. He worked on the most elusive Indian bird, the Jordan's courser, for his PhD. He currently works as a scientist with NCF, and his work spans across nature education and citizen science. He is a well-known nature writer in Tamil. He also blogs in Tamil and writes regularly in print and posts on his blog, Uyiri. He is a birder of repute and is equally fascinated by plants. He hugs his favorite plants when he meets them. So over to you, Jagan.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll quickly share my screen now. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Before that, I want to ask how to have that red pointer. Is there any way I can do it in the Zoom itself, or I just noticed that Tuhina had
You
red
can just right
pointer,
click out here and it will show you an option, pointer option.
right? Um,
In the pointer option, you can select a laser pointer.
I cannot figure that out. So before wasting more time, let me just quickly start my talk. So it's a Jordan-Scoser puzzle. How many of you heard of Jordan-Scoser? Can you type in your chat box this bird called Jordan-Scoser? Type. Oh, quite a few. Okay. Never. No. Yep. Okay. Fine. All right. So before going to Jordan-Scoser, okay, enough. Thank you so much. We will now learn about Jordan-Scoser. Before going to the Jordan-Scoser, let's learn about cursor. What is cursor? It's not a cursor. Many people coming to, are you working on Jordan's cursor? No, I'm not working on cursor. I'm working on cursor, Jordan's cursor. Okay. Coursers are long-legged birds like red-wattled lapwings. I'm sure many of you would have seen. And in India, we have three coursers. The first one is cream-colored courser. This one you can see in northwest India, in Rajasthan. They like to be in desert and open areas. And the beautiful Indian courser, beautiful looking bird. If you haven't seen that, please go and watch, not right away, but later on, once the lockdown is out and with the proper, the government says with the social distancing and everything. And this is a beautiful bird. This is an Indian courser. As you can see, it stands upright and then it has got a long legs, and these coursers prefer to walk a lot than fly. They do fly. They fly very fast. They do migrate, but locally maybe. But they like to walk a lot rather than go on the tree or perch on a bush or something like that. And the third one we have is a Jordan's courser. I'm sure you would have figured it out that those two coursers, cream color courser and Indian courser, are diurnal or otherwise they active during the daytime, and Jordan's courser is nocturnal. It's a very peculiar bird. And the closest relatives are living somewhere in Africa. So the Rhinoptilus coursers are living in. This is, somebody says this is Kaluvi Kodi. Yeah, in locally in Telugu it's called Kaluvi Kodi. Kaluvi is a name of the plant, means Carissa carandus, and the Kodi means chicken. Of course, it's not a chicken or a poultry, hen or whatever. It is Kodi. In other words, I mean, we call everything Chidiya or everything is Kurvi types. So this also people locally call us Kaluvi Kodi. So I studied this bird for some time and continue to studying them and trying to understand where all they occur, where all they live. That's what I try to do that. And little bit about Jordan's courser. The Jordan's courser, known mainly from Andhra Pradesh, it's endemic to India. In fact, you can even tell now that it's endemic to Andhra Pradesh, even endemic to Kadapa, because it doesn't occur anywhere else. It's not known from anywhere else. And like I said, it's nocturnal. That means active during the night time, and it's cursorial, means it walks a lot. That's called cursorial. And it was thought to be extinct for 86 years. It was, English, British bird watchers or researchers went around and then catch them and shoot them. That's how they watch birds and they describe the birds in those days in 1900. And after 86 years only, they found it, because many people were searching in wrong place. They were going in the daytime thinking that courser is a daytime bird, but no one actually bothered to search it during the night time. But finally, one fine day, sometime in January, BNHS scientist, it was rediscovered in a place called Kadapa, Redipalli in Kadapa, and the place where it was rediscovered called protected, now it's called Sri Lankamaleshwara Wildlife Sanctuary. And as you can see, this is a historical distribution of the Jordan's Kosa. And you can see it's there in now split at Telangana and Maharashtra border, and then one in Bradachalam, Sironcha, and you can see bottom down near Bengaluru. That's a place where the egg has been collected long ago, only egg, no bird was seen. And then one near Anantapur, one near Nellore, and then there are a few more drops, the blue drops near Kadapa. Okay. And that's the place where I studied. And as you can see, this is a Google Earth map of the sanctuary. The one on the left is Sri Lankamaleshwara Wildlife Sanctuary. And I have also visited this place, which is right to it, a long strip of white piece there showing up the Sri Peninsula Narasimha Wildlife Sanctuary. Okay, so the bird has been seen in these places earlier in '86. I started my study sometime in 2000. And when I went to this place, yeah, this is how the landscape looked like. And this is how the habitat, the place where the Jordan's Kosa live, looks like. It's an open area with little bit of bushes. It doesn't occur where the bushes are too thick or if it is completely open area. Indian Kosa and cream color Kosa prefer completely open area. You might have seen it. But Jordan's Kosa like this kind of lightly wooded, lightly, bushes, places with light bushes here and there. And it needs place to walk around, dance around, eat around, everything in this open area. And then during the daytime, they presumably go and rest at the bottom of at the shade of the bush. So how do this? So it's an interesting story how they rediscovered it, because the person called Bharat Bhushan, BNHS scientist, those days no phone call, no internet, no mobile, everything, but he published a pamphlet with Indian Kosa and Jordan's Kosa photographs side by side, and then he gave it to all the people, but particularly the bird trappers. And one person responded saying that I got your bird. He wrote a postcard to him. And then he was in Tirupati, so he was trying to come to that place, but it was raining heavily, so he couldn't come. So the bird was kept for 3 days, and then the person came and he saw the bird, but unfortunately after 1 day the bird died. So that's a bird. It's been preserved in BNHS museum. So how do this person go and search this bird? These hunters go and bird trappers go and catch the bird and eat it. So they use torch, obviously at night time they cannot see, and they also use a buzzer. So the buzzer mainly to mask the footfall of the person who is walking. So if you just walk, because the surface is stony, you cannot close your eyes and then walk. It will just make a lot of noise. The bird will hear you. So you have to be very careful and not so that the bird doesn't hear you or see you. And then they go and show the torch, and then you see the stick this man is having. He go and beat the bird, and then the bird dies, and then he eat. Of course, we don't want that to happen because it's one of the rarest bird in the world. It's critically endangered. That means the next level will be the bird will be extinct from the wild. So we don't want that to happen. So we went around and then asked this person. The person in the photograph is a guy called Aitanna. So he is the one rediscovered the bird and showed it to Dr. Bharat Bhushan, and he got a job from the forest department, saying that, oh, you become a protector, don't kill that anymore. And then he started protecting and started showing around this bird to everyone. The bird watchers comes, but unfortunately, what happens after that is many people went around and started catching stone curlew and other birds, and then, oh, please give me a job. He said, no, you got the wrong bird, buddy. No, we don't give a job to you. But anyway, but nowadays you're not supposed to go and catch any bird just like that. That also we should remember. So when in 2000, when we went around and then we asked Aitana to please go and take us and show the bird, and for 1 or 2 days we went around and then we searched at about 3-4 hours and then we saw the bird. So we said, okay, let's go tomorrow also. Then we went around and then searched the bird, it wasn't there. And then the third day we went around, we saw the bird. So it was like, the bird was there. Just because it's not there, we can't tell that the bird is not there. So it's good for bird watchers. Go and watch. If it is not there, we'll come back and next day. But if you want to study the bird, if you want to understand how often they live in that region, how often they eat, what does it eat, how far they walk and stuff like that, we can't do that. So we said, okay, Forest Department, Indian government, MOEF, please give us permission to catch birds, 5 birds, like Tuhina just did. And then we wanted to put a ring, and then we want to put a radio tracking device and stuff like that. I said, no, we won't give you permission because there are very less, there may be very less. You prove first that there are enough birds are available there, then we will give you permission to do the tracking. Then we said, oh no, what to do? Then we decided that, okay, let's do the camera trapping. Camera traps, you must be knowing camera traps. Many people use it for tigers and leopard and everything. So we thought we'll use it for the Jordan's courser. Not many people used camera traps for birds. So what happened then? We got very less money. We got only 8 camera traps because they are very expensive. So we said we will do it in a different method, like tracking strips. I'm sure you would have seen this bird walks a lot, like I told you. Yeah. So why don't we get the footprint of the bird and see whether the bird is there or not, like people do it for tiger and leopard and other things. Of course, we are not going to tell how many Jordan's courser are there because we cannot tell from which footprint this belongs to one, this belongs to another. No, we are not going to tell that. This belongs to Jordan's courser, this belongs to something else. So what did we do? So we started collecting the soil from the roadside. People thought that we are mad. Are you guys wearing pant, shirt, and everything you have looks like educated? Why are you collecting sand? We said we are going to find the bird. They said, okay, you guys are mad. Okay, fine, let it be. Then we collected all the soil from there. I need to have a break. Somebody is saying, please take a break. Yeah, I know I'm talking too fast, but sorry.
You have 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes left.
A break? Do I need to have a break now?
No. I'm just saying that you have 2 more minutes.
To finish?
Yeah.
Oh, so sad. Okay. So this is how we started. And then later we found a good place to get a very fine soil. And we go to the place where we get the Jordan's courser and then remove the place. And then we put the seed soil and then use the builder's trowel to flatten the what is that soil. And then you might think that the bird might think that there is something there, so I don't want to walk. So what we did, we collected soil from nearby location and then dusted on top of the tracking strips so that it just camouflage. And also we wanted to find out how the Jordan's courser footprint looked like. We don't know how the footprint of the Jordan's courser looked like. So we measured some of the museum specimens, 1 or 2, one from BNHS, couple from Cambridge, and then we know roughly how long they are. And I want to ask you guys, before 30 seconds, how many of you have seen chicken legs? I'm sure many of you would have eaten chicken leg piece, but how many of you have seen chicken legs? I'm sure many of you. Yeah, me, yeah. Okay, how many fingers are there in chicken's leg? Or toes? How many? Somebody say 4, 3, 4. Okay, so somebody say 3. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So people who said 3 can just pat on their shoulder. You're right. Sorry, you're wrong. Sorry, you cannot pat on your shoulder. Sorry. 4 said yes. I was thinking that I was talking about Jordan's course. Sorry. Chicken got 4. Yes, because they have got a hind toe, hind claw. Yeah, hallux it's called. So we eliminated all the birds which has got a hind claw, and one of them. So we collected only the birds which has got a 3 toes, and you can see the little brown dove walking. So we put tracking strip like this as well, and we put some grains and stuff so that the quails come, because quail is one of the contender. Okay, so finally we have to, and you can see the cameras to confirm that this is the track. This is a track of this bird. So this is what we do. We kept it, and then one fine day we found the Jordan's courser track, and you can see the what do you call the poop in between two tracks. That means the bird has pooped there, so that we can find what it has eaten. And this is a courser photograph we got. So this track belongs to this particular bird. So that's how we figured out. Now you can tell it's a Jordan's courser footprint, but how can you tell it's from the different yellow wattle lapwing, red wattle lapwing, stone curlew, Indian courser, barred button quail, blah, blah, blah. So we take plaster cast and then we measure it based on the angle between the outer and inner toe and the outer to central toe types, something like this. So this is outer toe, this is inner toe, I, and then C central toe. So this is the bottom. And here are some of the bird tracks. You can see the difference between Jordan's courser and all the other birds. And like this, I've kept, you can see the dots. Each dots comprise of 20 to 25 tracking strips. It's not just one dot. We have to put in a regular grid so that we know that where they have, we have got the, in case if Jordan's courser walks around, we will know that the bird has tracked there. And we got the footprint in 3 new places, one right on top, one in between the big bunch, and then one below that. Yeah, so these are some of the occupational hazards. So it's not easy to carry the soil inside the forest. Jeep will not go everywhere. And sometimes if rains, it goes off. That's all. You have to redeploy all the 25 tracking strips. And sometimes people write their names and send message to the fellow, whatever, hunter or a follower. Oh, I'm here. Please come back home. Whatever. It's written in Telugu. If you can read, please read. And some people just walk. Shepherds, they won't see. And this guy, look at this guy. He just jumped sideways, giving me a hard time. But nowadays, you don't have to do any tracking strips because Reconics camera is there. It's not so, it is expensive, but it's very easy to do this than tracking strips. Thank you. Sorry for exceeding my time limit.
No, that's okay. I'm sure people will have a lot of questions towards the end of the session, since studying an elusive bird is quite different from studying other more common birds. It seemed like almost like a lot of the techniques you used were more often used for mammals than they are used for birds. So before we open the floor to questions, I'll move on to our third speaker, Raman, who is back, fortunately. Hi. I'll quickly introduce Raman again.
Hi, Misha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Raman. Your video is...
Yeah, I'll just share my screen.
So Dr. Raman, Nature Science Initiative, scientist studies how changes in the environment caused by human activities affect wildlife, particularly birds. Most of his research is focused on woodpeckers in sal forests, but he's also studying hornbills in populated areas. Raman is closely involved in citizen science programs such as eBird and Season Watch that encourage ordinary people, particularly school children, to take on the role of scientists to observe and monitor birds and trees. He and his colleagues at Nature Science Initiative have been working to create awareness about nature among people, organizing public nature walks, workshops, and producing relevant awareness material, including books. Over to you, Raman.
And that may cause some issues in connectivity, so please bear with me. So, as Misha mentioned, that I've been working on woodpeckers, among other things, and here's my title slide, and the title slide doesn't have a woodpecker, does it? But there is a very interesting story which I'll tell you if you last the 15 minutes with me. Okay, I was fascinated with woodpeckers since childhood, and when I was going to school, maybe I was in standard 4 or 5, there used to be an educational chart put up in our classroom, which introduced us to birds. And among the favorite was this woodpecker. Yeah, and I was fascinated by it, and I often used to see it, walking on lawns in our school field or even at home. And so this is my introduction to woodpeckers as a child. So let me have a quick poll. Can you tell me if this is also your introduction to woodpecker? In other words, is this bird shown in the picture a woodpecker, according to you? Yeah?
Oh, a lot of them are saying no. Some of them know it's a hoopoe, but a few of them do say that, yeah, they thought it's a woodpecker.
Okay, so those of you who think this is a woodpecker, there's a bit more to it. So this bird remained my favorite until I very disappointingly discovered that this bird wasn't actually a woodpecker, but a hoopoe. And I should have guessed because I always used to see it walking on the ground and never on, a tree or a wood. So unfortunately, in our early educational material, and things are changing now thanks to efforts by initiatives like Early Bird and so on, so that people are more aware about their birds. So coming back to this bird, and it remained my favorite bird, and I always used to think it's woodpecker until the ripe old age of 24 years old, when I was 24 years old, and I went on my first bird watching walk, where a friend showed me this bird, yeah, on the right, and told me that this is a woodpecker. And we got into some kind of an argument because I had this bird in mind. Anyway, so it was sorted out, and I was pretty disappointed. But I was quite fascinated by this bird, and coming to think of it, I actually liked this even better than the hoopoe, which I thought was a woodpecker. Why did I like it? Maybe because it had a upright posture. Most birds are horizontal, and this one was vertical, able to see eye to humans. And it had a very nice aura and a very striking appearance. So let's fast forward to, so Actually, at that point, I didn't realize that several years later, I would end up studying woodpeckers. And I started working on studying woodpeckers in the state of Uttarakhand, in the Sal forest. And this is what Sal forests look like. Some of you may be familiar with these Sal forests. And they are beautiful, and the landscape is, I mean, they cover large swathes of land, particularly in Uttarakhand, in the base of the Himalayas. And they have a spectacular variety of my new favorite bird, woodpeckers. And it's quite amazing that there are at least 17 different species of woodpecker living more or less together in these Sal forests. And just to put it in context, the whole of India has recorded 32 woodpecker species. And the global richness of woodpeckers is 216. Now, woodpeckers are found all over the world, and they are closely related to, associated with forested areas. Yeah, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes and colors, as is apparent in this illustration. Now, this shows cross-section of the woodpeckers in Sal forests. And as you can appreciate, this bird here, somewhere at the right at the center, is our smallest woodpecker, which is the speckled piculate. And it's just about probably even less than a sparrow in size, smaller than a sparrow. And there is a very interesting variety. You have woodpeckers of different kinds. For example, here is a gray-headed woodpecker, and a Himalayan flameback woodpecker, a lesser yellow-naped woodpecker. Please note the fantastic coloration and color patterns. And let's just pause and let me tell you a bit more about woodpeckers. Now, woodpeckers are quite weird among birds. I mean, they have a fairly unique body design. Their beaks, the bills, is almost chisel-like, and it works as a, I would say it's an equivalent of a chisel crossed with a drill. So they can very nicely make, perforate these hardwood also. Since Jagan was also mentioning about bird toes, the foot of the woodpecker is also modified, in the sense that, like, the chicken has 3 toes in front and 1 back. In the woodpecker, it is 2 in front and 2 at the back. And this enables the woodpecker to have a nice grip on vertical surfaces. Another interesting thing which is not visible when you watch a woodpecker is its tongue. And many woodpeckers have really long tongues, as shown in this illustration. And they use it to probe these crevices and holes and galleries made by worms and grubs in the hardwood, and to catch them, and that is their primary diet. The other notable feature about woodpeckers is they use their tail, they prop their tail against the trunk. So they use it for extra support. So the tail is made up of very stiff feathers, and this helps the woodpecker gain traction better on vertical surfaces. They have a very, very special role in ecology, and the main, one of the major roles is, because they are primarily insectivorous, they feed on insects, they help in keeping a balance on the insect population and prevent them from exploding. Studies suggest that where woodpeckers are present, the abundance of insects is 40% less than other ways. So they are, substantially contributing to keeping a balance on insect population. The other important role that woodpeckers have is their capacity to create holes. Now, a lot of birds, so woodpeckers make holes both for nesting, but also, outside the breeding season and otherwise, they use another set of holes to spend their night. So every woodpecker has at least, makes at least 2 different holes in a year. So which creates a lot of, holes, which tree holes, which provide refuge to a huge number of other animals, including miners, hornbills, owls, and other reptiles as well. Bats. Now, one can think of it, and I'd like to share this cartoon with you, made by a friend, Rohan Chakravarti. So he's joking and mentioning that woodpecker holes are real estate, and this is absolutely true, because once the woodpecker abandons its cavity, they are reused by other animals, and some animals also repurpose it, refurbish it. For example, hornbills, they seal the entrance and all, but most of the woodpeckers, most of the cavities are made by woodpeckers themselves. Now, of special interest is this largest woodpecker in my area, and it's called the Great Slaty Woodpecker. It's globally endangered, and it's arguably the largest surviving woodpecker in the world, and it's huge. It is 51 centimeters, so it's about the size of your forearm. The length of your palm plus your forearm. And having said that, woodpeckers are strange, and this is even weirder. For example, if you look at it, it looks more like a plucked chicken than a woodpecker. And interestingly, it is a group living bird. So you often find them in flocks. And these flocks are actually family groups. The interesting part is that the parents use the elder siblings as recruits to help raise the current year's chicks. So there'll be these parents plus elder brothers and sisters attending to this year's smaller chicks. So let me share a few videos with you, which will help you, appreciate the uniqueness of these birds. Give me a moment, please. Yeah, I'll just enable screen share. Please bear with me. Okay, are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a series of short video clips, and the audio may or may not work, but I'll provide background commentary. So here's a great slaty woodpecker male. You can make out by the red on the cheek, and it's excavating a cavity. So please note that for a bird which is half a meter, in length, how big is the size of the cavity it's creating, and also try and appreciate how big the cavity would be and how useful it would be for other wild animals. Now, I was talking about the weirdness of these woodpeckers. So look at them. Here's a flock of woodpeckers. They are behaving more like babblers than woodpeckers. So this is a family group, and they make these, socializing gestures. And so we were studying nesting of the great slaty woodpecker, and just to put things in perspective, sal trees are really huge, and they can be 100 feet high. And the cavities of these woodpeckers are also pretty high, so they're at least 80 feet high. Now, here's a friend of mine. Look at the way he's climbing. So our job was to observe the cavities. So he's just, climbing up and taking the observations. Okay, so here you see an active nest of the great slaty woodpecker. And you can make out that there are multiple individuals attending to that cavity. So there's a pair, plus you'll also see another individual. Here you can see 3 individuals. One at the mouth of the cavity, the other behind, and the other on the right. See, so the cavity itself is very deep because it has to house 2 adult woodpeckers at least, plus growing chicks, and they can be as many as 4. So, I mean, it goes horizontally, and then it's pretty deep. It could be about at least 2 feet deep. Yeah. And here we see a change in duties. One woodpecker is going out, and the other will enter now. Yeah. So a little bit of more footage. And here's an adult feeding a nestling. So what it does is it catches insects and food, and then it regurgitates it. Basically, it keeps it in its a pouch in the, and then it takes it out and feeds the chick. And here is that in operation. So the bird on the left is a chick, and on the right is the parent trying to feed it. Yeah. So let's get back to okay. So now you can appreciate how large those cavities must be and how useful they may be. And the real estate mafia is also in operation in the forest itself. And probably the biggest mafia is the common myna. Now, I have a short anecdote to share. And this myna, this is actually a woodpecker, the great slaty woodpecker, in the process of making a new nest cavity. And you can make out by the rim, and you can see the fresh wood excavated. And while I mean, these woodpeckers spend a lot of time excavating it, and then of course they have to go and feed at some point. So when they had gone out feeding, within minutes this myna came in and occupied this cavity. And what's more, it started bringing material to build its nest inside the cavity. Now, after an hour or so, those woodpeckers, they returned. And they found this to be occupied by mynas. So these are much larger, so they managed to chase the myna out. And it was quite interesting. So the woodpeckers were actually flinging out the nesting material, which the myna had, put in the cavity. Now, so we had a camera trained on this, and so this happened again and again, and the myna persisted. And eventually, the next day, we found that the woodpeckers were missing, and we found them to be building, starting to build a new cavity in the nearby tree. And basically, they had given up possession to this myna. So we changed our cameras and trained them on the new cavity. And a couple of days later, when we came to check the cameras, we found there was absolutely no activity in this new cavity. So we were quite disappointed. While we were about to leave, we noticed that the original cavity was again occupied by woodpeckers. And as we were, looking at the woodpeckers, the myna actually came and occupied the new cavity. So basically, the myna forced the woodpeckers to make a hole for them. So that's a very interesting anecdote. And it reminded me of this popular, very humorous Hindi movie. And the ending was like this only, where, the mafia loses. But that is not often the case in nature. So anyway, yeah, so there's a slight issue with this slide. So what is involved in studying woodpeckers? Basically, it requires one to be very patient, because woodpeckers, particularly in dense forests, are very difficult to spot, and it takes a while to get used to them, but they are quite rewarding, and I mean, it's quite fascinating. And one needs to walk, honeycomb the forests to be able to appreciate woodpeckers properly. But let me end with another incident, and coming back to our original slide. Remember the first slide? So during studying woodpeckers, I have been, chased by tigers, and this is actually a picture taken while on a woodpecker walk. I mean, walk to study woodpeckers, and multiple times being chased by elephants. But what was the most dangerous animal I found was this bird, which is a honey buzzard. And here's the story. So one day we were, again, in the morning we were returning from our woodpecker surveys. And suddenly a bird landed in a tree right above us. And we didn't pay much attention, and that bird actually was a honey buzzard. And within minutes, we were attacked by this huge swarm of bees. So what had actually happened was that this honey buzzard had gone for the beehive, which was concealed among the foliage on the tree up, and it had disturbed those bees, and the bees came straight at us. And since we were walking, and we had to just let go and run for our lives. But the bees chased us for more than 1.5 kilometers. And I lost my spectacles, my binoculars, my camera, and I also fell down a couple of times and ended up with a hairline fracture on my forearm. So yeah, so whenever you go out, please keep an eye out, not just for tigers and elephants, but this dangerous bird of prey, which is the honey buzzard. And thank you. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take.
Wow, that was quite interesting, Raman. Thank you. And thank you, Tuhina and Jagan, for giving us a sneak peek into how it is like to be an ornithologist. We'll open the floor to questions now. So if you have any question, please write the name of the person whom you're addressing the question to along with your question. Okay, so I'll quickly read through the chat box.
Misha, there were a few questions earlier which came. Do you want to take those first?
Yeah, sure. So when I asked during Raman's talk, how does the tree survive with such a big cavity? Because you said that the cavity of these.
Yeah, so actually, if you look at the tree, the central part is called the heartwood, and that is largely dead wood. I mean, dead cells. So these woodpeckers, they perforate the living tissue and mostly use the dead part of the wood. So the tree can continue to live. Of course, that doesn't mean that, I mean, it is not damaging the tree, but it doesn't die. I mean, sal trees can be really huge and they can last and withstand us.
Okay. Question for Jagan from Nanda. What is the current status of Jordan's Kosa?
Current status of the journal. You want happy answer or a sad answer? Okay, I'll tell you both. I'll tell the sad first. I mean, if you think it's sad, the last authentic record of the Jordan's Kosa, 2008. After that, no sign of Jordan's Kosa. The happy answer is the forest department is still very much want to find the courser, and they are putting up camera traps everywhere. So someday we might find a courser. And if you are willing to help, go to Wikipedia and there will be a call of the Jordan's Kosa. Listen to it. Don't record it. Don't play it loud anywhere in the forest, and take proper permission after the lockdown is done, and go in the evening, listen for calls in the potentially suitable habitat. You might hear one. That's a happy answer. Thank you.
Okay. Question for Raman. How do woodpeckers' brains sustain the impact of constant pecking?
Yeah, actually, there has been a study with so much head banging that the woodpeckers do. So some scientists researched it and found that the gray matter, of the woodpecker is exceptionally dense. I mean, by dense, I mean literally, not metaphorically. So they are able to, survive those, the impacts and the shocks.
Misha, there was a question for Tuhina
Yeah.
right during her talk. I'll just repeat that. Somebody asked, who should one contact if we find or photograph a ringed bird?
At the end of this session, I'd put up one email address called bands@bnhs.org. It's BANDS @bnhs.org. So if you let us know the details of the band or tag, whatever you see on the bird, we communicate it to the ringer.
Could you spell that again?
It's BANDS
BANDS
at bnhs.org.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Garima also type that. All right. There's a similar question on numbers of Jordan-Scosser, estimate on numbers of Jordan-Scossers currently. Do we know how many Jordan-Scossers are there in the wild?
We don't know.
We don't. Again for Jagan, can we not have captive breeding for Jordan-Scossers like we have for the GIB, Great Indian Bustard?
Difficult because we don't know anything about this bird. We have to find the courser first, and then we have to understand what is their ecology, when do they breed, when do they call a lot, when do they breed, when they lay eggs. Nobody has found a nest of them. And then if possible, if there is a good population, then well, we don't need to do captive breeding. But some birds doesn't breed in the captive also. So the answer is don't know, not possible now.
Okay. Tuhina, Ashish is asking that you said some birds fly 3 years continuously. Was that?
It's the sooty shearwater. There could be other pelagic birds which could also be doing that, but this is one of the species they recorded. So it spent 3 years at sea.
Again, a question to Jagan. Any idea about the distribution range of Jordan-Scosser in the past?
I think I've showed a map, Bhadrachalam, and then Sironcha, and then Anantapur district, and then Nellore and Kadapa, mainly in Andhra Pradesh. Thank you.
Okay. Raman, do all or some woodpeckers create circular rings with their beaks on the tree trunks?
Can you repeat the question, Misha?
Do all or some woodpeckers create circular rings with their beaks on tree trunks?
I'm assuming you mean circular cavities, the holes.
Yeah.
So what I've observed is that particularly the great slaty woodpecker has a nearly circular, entrance to the cavity, almost perfect circle. Whereas most of the other woodpeckers, even larger ones, have an oval shaped. I hope that answers your question, if I have understood it correctly.
Okay, there's another question for you. Many times in forests, we see trees with multiple cavities carved by woodpeckers on some trunk. Are these multiple doors to their nest? What are those multiple cavities?
Yeah, so if there are multiple cavities, it's likely not to be a nest hole, but a roost hole, which the woodpeckers use to spend their night and, in protection. And they may or may not be connected. So, for example, I've observed a few where the heartwood has totally rotted away, and it's like a continuous. It's almost like a flute, connected in the center with holes. So yeah, it's possible.
Again, another question for Raman. Was there a study done on cooperative breeding of the great slaty woodpeckers?
Yes, but not in India. It was done in Borneo by this researcher called Martian Lamerting. Now, this woodpecker has not been studied much, even though it's endangered. And hopefully, the study that I am involved in will help shed more information on this endangered species.
All right, question to Tuhina. Does the ringing and putting transmitters on birds hurt the bird in any way?
The whole intention is to not hurt the bird so that it can fly in its normal migratory route. Only in some cases, there have been some records where birds have been hurt by the rings, where the ringing was completely stopped for those species. We don't have them here, so something called a piping plover is where they recorded a lot of injuries and the leg would fall off. They've stopped that and they've moved to color tagging of those species. We also don't do it on chukar or birds whose legs keep growing as they age. So those couple of species, transmitters, a well-put transmitter is not going to affect the bird. But in some cases, again, if it shifts a little bit, it could actually impact its, the flight pattern of that bird. So there have been cases where they've been affected by it. Also with color tags, there have been studies where mate selection has been affected, especially in finches, where some colored birds were preferred more by the females than the other colored birds. So there have been certain kind of studies, and then when we understand that, we stop that study altogether and move to another one.
Okay, thank you. For Jagan, other than bird trapping, what were the major threats to the Jordan's courser?
People like human like us. People, human like us,
Makes sense.
goes and then hunters, the illegal bird trappers, habitat destruction, constructing canal, dam, everything. Yeah, all done by human. Thank you.
Okay. And another question for Raman. Do all or some woodpeckers, okay, no, I'm going back to the circular ring question again. Tuhina, this is for Tuhina, is the bird ringing program open for volunteers? I remember BNHS used to take volunteers in the past, not sure now.
We used to, not anymore, because we've had to face some PR issues eventually, and we already have to manage 3 trappers who speak 3 different languages. Wouldn't want to extend that to another person now. But you can always write to BNHS in case there are some areas where we need volunteers. We could always contact them.
Okay. Jagan, do coursers and lapwings belong to the same family?
Canadriformis, not same family, but they belongs to the the group called Canadriformis. All the plovers, prating coals, coursers, all belongs to the same. They all nest on the ground. Yeah.
Okay. Raman, do woodpeckers can also cause significant damage to the sides of buildings and telephone poles in concrete jungles. Is that true?
Telephone poles, no? Maybe they're talking about the US where you have wooden telephone poles. Yeah, but I mean, we hardly see woodpeckers in cities here, in India at least. So yeah, I have to qualify that assumption.
And Krish is asking, what do woodpeckers survive on?
Mostly insects. For example, the great slaty woodpecker, it eats a lot of ants. But occasionally, I've seen woodpeckers eating fruit and occasionally take nectar from flowers as well. But they are primarily insectivorous.
Okay. Tuhina, during continuous migration, how do birds rest or sleep?
So different things. So when I mentioned, let's say about the bar-tailed godwit, which flies continuously, they sleep with half their brain at one time. So half their brain is asleep and half is working. They do not rest while they are migrating. But if you're talking about the birds which are at sea for very long times, in their cases, they almost lock their wings in such a way that it takes far lesser energy for them to find land and land there than to just keep flowing with the tailwinds. So that's how they take rest for whenever they're at sea for long distances.
All right, I think that's all for questions. Garima, Abhisheka, or Subhadra, do you guys, did I miss any questions?
No, I think, and we have to end now because it's nearly 12:30. But just wanted to remind everybody that you can find all our earlier sessions and you'll find this one as well on our YouTube channel. So please do follow that in case you missed one of the earlier ones. And you can also follow our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages where we announce the future sessions.
Yes. Thank you again, Tuhina, Jagan, and Raman for joining us. And everyone, please stay tuned for our future sessions. Like Garima said, the announcement of which will be on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. So, thank you, guys.
Thank you, Misha, Garima.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.